Hi people, Moreno Ravenberg here again as always and as usual. I am going to share another orrery slash semi-geolocation chart to show you guys. The question is already in the top left corner. Will the anti-French African alliance succeed? This is about a political matter. I have been watching this video, Are French efforts to reset ties with Africa failing? From Al Jazeera English. No offense to Al Jazeera, but I don't recommend them. But bottom line is, hold on, let me check my history. I am going to share this video as well as another video with you guys. For example, this from the New Tourist, Niger coup, Niger bans export of uranium and gold to France. Now, you don't have to go over everything into detail. There's another one here. These three videos, I'm going to leave them in the description of this video for you guys. Enjoy, in a matter of speaking, if you're interested. Africa's youngest president, Ibrahim Traore, says the continent's story has to change, okay? It's from Burkina Faso. Now, long story short, there is an alliance essentially of African countries, a metaphorical alliance. My point is that African countries that used to belong to France are rising up against them, so to speak, and in a certain context, obviously, literally. And examples are Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, you name it. Mali, they changed their language. The official language used to be French and they changed it. Russia is also backing up some of these countries and providing them with free weapons based on these videos. And it just goes on. A coup was staged in Niger. They deposed the president, and now a political party or the military detachment, I want to say, that is essentially currently in power, has a good deal of supporters. They are expressing strong anti-French sentiments. Plain and simply put, they're of the opinion that the French are bleeding them dry, that their countries are rich in natural resources, but the French are taking everything and leaving them with little to nothing. Now, this topic interested me by coincidence so much, not from a neutral perspective, purely from an occult perspective. To the point where I wanted to know, will the anti-French African alliance succeed? Hold on, let me show you the thingy as well. The description, e.g. countries like Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, etc. that have sided with Putin and Russia and turning their back on Macron and France. Will they succeed in their goals and objective of turning their countries into prosperous nations? So I had two questions. How will this thing end for this so-called anti-French African alliance? Will they succeed in their goals? In terms of prying themselves loose from France's grip, so to speak, and will they be able to turn their countries from, bluntly put, shitholes into prosperous nations? So yeah, I'm going to explain it to you guys. I already went over it, so I'm just going to try to keep it as short as possible without leaving out any applicable information. Now, the anti-French African alliance is represented by Saturn, and the general values apply here as well as retrogrades. Saturn is 5 degrees in Pisces going retrograde, which stands for, again, the anti-French African alliance. House 1 to 6 belongs to them. I'll be referring to them as the AFA from now on. And France is represented by the 7th all the way until the 12th house. I'm just going to explain everything really quickly. Now, Saturn is positively aspected to the moon, which is 8 degrees in Taurus in the 3rd house. It is trine the 6th house, albeit off by a couple of minutes, 26 minutes to be precise. And yeah, that's essentially it for positive aspects for the AFA, the Anti-French African Alliance. Now, the fact that they're represented by Saturn in Pisces and going retrograde stands for the fact that they are they're experiencing hardship. Their story, the story of their so-called lives in general, the lives of their nations and the people residing within them, is one of hardship and pain and misery and dealing with the traumatic past of metaphorical colonization. I say metaphorical purely because I don't want to say literal colonization because, you know, that's a different debate in itself, but not one that I'm obviously going to get into. Oh yeah, before I continue, Saturn is also trine the pot of fortune, which is 6 degrees in Scorpio in France's 3rd house, and also trine the south node. I'll get to that in a second. In Libra, going stationary. Stationary means it stands still. Okay, it's in one place. It's almost trine. It's also off by a couple of minutes. Almost trine in France's 3rd house. Now, the 1st house deals with the AFA. and their overall situation. The second house stands for their economy. The third house stands for their infrastructure. The fourth house stands for their resources, natural resources, so minerals, soil-based resources. The fifth house stands for overall what they have in the way of entertainment venues and whatnot, so things to entertain the public, and speculation overall. And the sixth house stands for the fifth house isn't all that important in this context, and the sixth house stands for overall working conditions and circumstances of their countries. Okay, so labor, simply put. I already said what Saturn going retrograde in Pisces means. Now, Saturn has almost conjunct the second house. It's off by 2 degrees. It's 10 degrees, honestly. Well, 10 degrees and 3 minutes to be precise. That stands for the fact that the anti-French African alliance, just like they claim their countries are rich in resources and yet they're poor, and it stands essentially for the fact that technically speaking or theoretically they are rich, they are wealthy, but I also need to point out that Saturn is one of the weakest positions it can be in. Saturn in Pisces is just brutal. Saturn is very, very weak in Pisces, and it's also going retrograde. And the conjunction, even, it's not a conjunction, but an almost conjunction, is also weak. 15 degrees in Pisces. This stands for the fact that the story of these countries, their lives, is that they're being exploited and taken advantage of, bluntly put, by the French. Okay, I'm just being blunt here. Only, again, taken advantage of and whatnot, I only mean that within the context of this chart. Like I said, I'm not going to get into a different debate and whatnot. That's all up in the air. But I'm just going to be blunt for now within said given context. Now, Neptune is 27 degrees in Pisces, going retrograde in the second house, and that simply stands for the fact that these countries are essentially being milked for all their worth in terms of resources by the French. The third house, you've got the majority of active resistance for the third is in the third house. Chiron is in Aries, going retrograde, and it's also conjunct the third house, albeit up to a minor extent. This stands for the fact that these African countries, these formerly French African countries, there is a strong sentiment to revolt against oppressionist regime, so to speak, the French oppressionist regime, and through aggressive means. That's why it's in Aries, going retrograde. But there is no full support yet from the population. Support is growing, but it's not full yet. And it's conjunct the North Node, which is 27 degrees, going stationary, so also standing still, just like the South Node, obviously. In the third house, and the North Node, generally speaking, stands for what, regardless of which party we're referring to, what they need to focus on. The South Node, both the North and the South Node can be said about, can apply to both countries or both entities in this case. Both conversational entities, both parties. But in this case, it applies to the AFA. It stands for the fact that that's what they need to do. I'm not inciting any kind of, I'm not condoning any violence here, or I'm not advocating for any violence or anything like that. No. I'm strictly referring to this within the context of astrology and how it mirrors this event and the situation as it is. I'll just label this a global conflict. The North Node is in Aries, stationary in the third house, which stands for the fact that that is essentially what needs to happen. The AFA needs to revolt, and they need to be firm and resolute. That's why it's going stationary. They need to be aggressive about gaining their independency, economic independency from France, and they need to maintain that level of intensity on a day-to-day basis. That's why it's in the third house, the house that Gemini rules over. And now here we go. The AFA, represented by Saturn, they are sextile the Moon. The Moon is 8 degrees in Taurus, which stands for, the Moon is weak in Taurus. The Moon is strong in water signs and weak in air signs. Taurus opposes Scorpio. The Moon in Taurus, in this context, stands for, in the third house, stands for the fact that there is slow yet steady progress in terms of the AFA realizing their hopes, wishes, and aspirations of essentially doing the aforementioned, being independent economically and no longer being exploited by France, to put it that way, so to speak. Jupiter in Taurus in the third house, conjunct the Nadir, almost conjunct Uranus in Taurus. In the fourth house, so Cancer's house, stands for it stands for the fact that these countries are very wealthy in terms of terrestrial, so soil-based resources. Um, Jupiter specifically indicates that they are not benefiting from it on a day-to-day basis, ironically. And Uranus there stands for the fact that there is also a good high density of mineral-rich elements that can be used towards or for technological purposes and related, albeit prone to, I want to say, instability. So referring to quantities and qualities. So I'm assuming what I said is clear. In layman's terms, I simply mean that, listen, these anti-French alliance, African alliance countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, etc., they have a shit ton of wealth, terrestrial resources. Most shitholes do. Specifically, the kind of resources you use to make electronic appliances, to generate electricity, running water, for example, the pipelines, the material that pipes are made of for running water, for indoor plumbing, stuff like that. But Uranus is weak in Taurus in the fourth house. Uranus is okay in the fourth house, but it's weak in Taurus, which stands for a lack of quantity. So that means that, for example, if you, for example, open up like an office in one of these countries and you mine, you're purely focused on stuff that you use to create electronics, for example, whatever material you use to make cell phones. Just an example. Okay, the components, the the electronical or electronic components of that you can see in cell phones. You can expect to at some moments run dry, as in you're used to mining, for example, 20 tons of steel. All of a sudden, there's only going to be like 5 tons or 7 tons, or the quality isn't going to be as good as in, hey, listen, the steel that we mined last year was like 90% pure and now it's like 75%, blah, blah, blah. That's what I mean, okay? A simple explanation for idiots. No offense to anyone out there, but it's a matter of whom the shoe fits. Now, to continue on, like I said, the AFA was only sextile the moon. The other entities, like I said, the planets, Neptune, Jupiter, and Uranus, they're not aspected. They simply convey, thereby meaning that they simply convey things the way they currently are for these countries. There is a trine. Saturn is almost trine with the sixth house, 13 degrees in Cancer, but it's off by 26 minutes, like I already said earlier. And it's in Cancer, which stands for, it's a water sign. It's an afflicted trine. Now, that simply stands for the fact that the AFA dreams of essentially enjoying their own soil and all the riches that their lands have, and that creating work-related opportunities for them, so labor-based opportunity. And that is essentially it in a nutshell for the anti-French African alliance. I'll get to conclusions at the end of this video. Now let's do France. Now, the seventh house represents France. France is represented by the Sun, which is in Leo. They're conjunct their own ascendant. France is opposed to Earth. By default, it's opposed to Earth, which is 15 degrees in the opposing sign, which is Aquarius. Now, by default, all of the aforementioned, the France being here, conjunct their own ascendant, opposed to Earth, stands for the fact that France wishes to continue their metaphorical oppression of the anti-French African alliance. They want to keep things the way they are. They want to keep enjoying the mineral-rich benefits of these countries for economic profit and whatnot. Lilith, 23 degrees in Leo, stands for the same thing. Venus, the same thing, also 23 degrees in Leo, albeit going retrograde. This simply means that France wants a peaceful resolve to this, all the while showing that they're not messing around or about. Mercury, Pallas, and Mars are all in Virgo. Mercury at its strongest, obviously. Mars also does not too badly there, and Pallas also at its strongest. And they're all of them are conjunct the 8th house. Now, Mercury and Pallas simply stands for the fact that France essentially wants to be clever and maintain, just like I said, they want to maintain their so-called stranglehold over these countries, their labor-based stranglehold. That's why it's in Virgo. both generally speaking overall, that's what Mercury says, as well as Pallas, which stands for more on a day-to-day basis. Um, Up to a very minor extent, I'm not entirely sure about this, but it also stands for the fact that France is also getting like something in the way of pharmaceutical thingies, elements from these countries. I think things that you create medicines from, okay, something like herbs or anything, something of a terrestrial nature, obviously, that they use for pharmaceutical purposes or similar, pharmaceutical, medical, or similar purposes. Conjunct, let me see, and all of these are conjunct the 8th house, and the 8th house is also ruled by Virgo, which stands for, again, the continuation of their economic prosperity. Mars being there stands for the fact that France is a tad materialistic, to say the least, in this specific question or within the context of this question. And Mars is in Virgo, which stands for the fact that they're not backing down. This degree stands for hypocrisy. It stands for the fact that France pretends or wants what's best for these countries, and yet at the same time, all the while, carrying out their own agenda, as in extracting as much wealth as possible. They have a typical classically European approach to this whole affair. Now, the Sun, so France, these things stand for the way things are. All of these planets, everything from Lilith all the way to Mars stands for the way things are because they're not aspected, with the exception of Lilith and Venus. The Sun, so representing France, is not, the France is an aspect at the Mercury thingy. The Mercury and the Mercury primarily. Yeah, the Mercury, Pallas, and Mars. I was going to say it's semi-sextile, all three, because it does fall within the 3-degree orb. But I don't want to overcomplicate things. You don't have to bother with that. All of it is too minimal to mention. Nothing mention worthy. It's only conjunct these two, but even these two are slightly far away. The conjunction is off by, for Lilith, 32 minutes and 40 minutes for Venus. Now, the Sun, again, representing France, is sextile Ceres. Ceres is in Libra, and it's in the 8th house, stands for, again, everything I just said. France wants to maintain its income-based balance in relation to the relations it has with these countries. And it's also sextile their 3rd house, which stands for, it is weak, okay? It stands for the fact that there are difficulties for both Ceres as well as the 3rd house, because the Sun is weak in Libra. It's an air sign. So how do I put this? It stands for success, but with difficulty. So I repeat, France being sextile Ceres and sextile the 3rd house stands for the fact that they want to have things keep going the way they are, but there are difficulties of a non-harmonious nature, obviously, because this is a conflict, not just a political conflict, a potentially armed conflict as well, or one that might warrant heavy arms to be put to use. Not that I'm advocating for that, like I said. No. Peace is always the best policy. If war is inevitable, then it's inevitable. Fine. But if it's unavoidable, then so be it. But no, peace is always better. What else was I gonna say? France is square midheaven, representing the 4th house, so their own country essentially. So things at a domestic level, things at a French level, things on French soil. And the square here stands for, Scorpio in this context stands primarily for electricity, and it also stands for all the things that are manufactured using mineral-based resources that they extracted from these countries. Things like uranium, things like gold, silver, copper. Okay. I saw in one of the videos that a third of Niger's thingy, a third of the uranium that the uranium that Niger the uranium that Niger exports to France, or that the French essentially extract from Niger, powers a third of France, electrically speaking, or regarding electricity. So yeah, I know from past experiences that Scorpio deals with electricity. There is a degree that literally stands for electrical. I don't know exactly which degree that is, but there is a degree in Scorpio, in the zodiac, within the zodiac sign Scorpio, that literally stands for electricity. or doing things in an electrical or flashy manner. And it's not this degree, 19. This degree simply stands for frequency. This simply stands for the fact that provided that things keep going the way they are and that these countries actually get their way, the AFA, that France will have difficulty dealing with, they will have to deal with, as well as difficulty in terms of dealing with shortages regarding the aforementioned electricity and other things that these the minerals that they imported from these countries, from the AFA, how they benefited from them. Okay, so I repeat, France is going to have difficulty coping with the shortage of the things that they're used to getting from these countries in the way of minerals and precious metals and vice versa. Yeah, that's what I mean. I simply had minor difficulty phrasing it initially. The Sun, France is also trine their 5th house, which is 16 degrees in Sagittarius. This 16 degrees stands for uncertainty. It stands for the fact that France, just like I said, it stands for essentially what the rest here says. France tries to keep a dignified composure. They try to maintain composed and dignified, and yet at the same time, they're not sure about themselves in terms of what to do, how to handle this matter the best, which I can't really blame them for, and which is obviously, honestly visible to me as well, just by watching the aforementioned videos. And that's essentially it. Pluto in Capricorn going retrograde stands for France's so-called oppression over these countries in terms of getting their way, and Juno, which is 25 in Cancer, stands for the same thing from the vantage point of the anti-French African alliance. Essentially, them wanting to free themselves from said so-called oppression. Now, having explained everything, a note that I need to make, this is something that astrologers especially will understand, is that all of this is in reverse, indicating the hostility of it all. The rulers of classical houses, instead of those classical rulers, or the rulers of classical houses are within the context of this chart represented by, elementally speaking, opposing rulers. For example, the 2nd house, which stands for these countries, these African countries, their income, their overall economic situation, GDP and whatnot, just how much money they have. This is the house of Taurus traditionally, and yet it's ruled by an elementally opposing sign, by Pisces. Pisces is a water sign, and Taurus is an earth sign. Here, for example, the 3rd house, house of Gemini traditionally. Gemini is an air sign. And here you have Aries. Aries is a fire sign. Earth and water oppose each other in astrology elementally, and fire and air oppose each other elementally in astrology again. So yeah, you can see for yourself, it's like topsy-turvy with this chart. What that simply means stands for the fact that one party has an edge over the other, and I don't think I need to point out who that is. France has a substantial edge over these countries, or has had at least up to this point. It simply is another indicator of the way things currently are for these countries, for both of them, or the way things currently stand for both parties. Now, to answer the question, having summarized everything, the question is, will they succeed in their goals? Will they be able to gain economic independence and autonomy from France? The groundbreaking thing here is the AFA is trine the pot of fortune, which is 6 degrees in Scorpio, and also almost trine the South Node, which stands for yes, highly likely. Okay, the anti-French African alliance, so all of these countries like Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, all of them that are essentially saying enough is enough, France, you've exploited us for way too long, blah, 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 blah. Putin is helping us out, we side with Putin and Russia, and blah, 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 blah. These countries, there is a high probability that they will succeed in their aims. That's the answer to question number 1. And the second question answered, will they succeed in their objective of turning their countries into prosperous nations? Will they successfully be able to go from shithole to, no offense to any Africans, from shithole to the actual wealthy country like European countries, or at least halfway. I'm not scoffing. I'm simply because it's quite far-fetched. Any person will have to agree that it's far-fetched. Because before I even cast a shot, I was like, that has to be highly unlikely, because you don't go from 0 to 10,000 like overnight. And the answer, the almost conjunction with the second house and the almost trine with the sixth house, and the fact that it's not aspected to Jupiter and Uranus, and the sextile with the moon indicate that the answer is no. These countries will make some headway. They will be better off than they are currently. That's why it's almost conjunct, but even the conjunction is a weak conjunction. But they won't be as well off as European countries, for example. They won't all of a sudden turn into beautiful, prosperous nations. They will be doing better for themselves, but not nearly as well as they, so to speak, anticipate. It's just like it's a pipe dream, honestly, at this point. At least for now. At least for now. Again, the sextile with the moon stands for overall growth and progress, but at a very slow pace, at a gradual, stable, but slow pace. And last but not least, the Earth also indicates that. The Earth indicates the reason for why they can't go from poor country to super wealthy country, or just outright wealthy country, is because they lack the technological and administrative and overall intellectual capacity. The Anti-French African Alliance lacks the intellectual, administrative, and technological, primarily technological capacity to be able to make their countries prosper. And I already knew this, because I said to myself, even if they succeed, they don't have the technological know-how. I mean, what are they going to do without European innovation, technological innovation and whatnot? Okay, usually European companies, big Western companies, have they have the knowledge and the know-how and the equipment of a technological as well as overall nature to engage in large-scale industrial mining. And these countries are simply too poor, not just regarding resources, because even if they could afford all of the equipment, the aforementioned equipment, they still don't have the knowledge. And obviously, I don't think that France or any other European country that will side with France will be like jumping to share knowledge with the Anti-French African Alliance countries. And even if they do, again, success or that kind of knowledge, again, it doesn't come falling out of the sky. And it doesn't, learning said knowledge or attaining said knowledge does not happen overnight. It's something that takes a substantial amount of time to not only absorb, but also master. So yeah, that's the answer to question 2. There will be some, like, there will be some growth, like African growth will be like, what, 20%, 15%, 30% at best, but Africa isn't, or these countries specifically, the formerly French African countries, or just outright French African countries, they won't all of a sudden turn into high-tech big-end countries like the US and Australia and whatnot. They won't become like part of the G7, so to speak. No African country turning into Germany anytime soon. I mean, within the context of this chart and this inquiry overall. So that was it, guys. I hope you enjoyed another orrery chart. It's been a while. Until next time, bye-bye.